just hear you.
I just heard some.
Welcome to Politics Done Right. My name is Egberto Willies, your host. Thank you so kindly for being here. Today, we have a very special guest. In the house with us is the one and only founder of Code Pink. Code Pink, Madea Benjamin. She's with us. She's now she is the author of Is Peace Possible in Ukraine? And also this morning, I got up and reading Common Dreams, found an article blazing with the kind of info we need about Ukraine called the 8 Steps. What is it called again? What is it start? Where am I? Where am I? It's called the 8. Well, I'll tell you what. I'll let her talk about it. But Madea Benjamin, welcome to Politics Done Right. How are you doing today?
I'm doing good. Thanks for having me on. I think you're referring to the 8 reasons why now is a good time to call for negotiations in Ukraine.
Absolutely.
But yeah, any time is a good time.
You know, I woke up this morning, and that's one of the first places I normally check. And I checked on it, and it's like there. But anyway, great to have you on Politics Done Right, Madea. I think the last time I saw you was in Wisconsin at the Democracy Convention. How has it been since then?
Well, it's one would have hoped that we would have been in a time of peace after the U.S. got out of Afghanistan, but it looks like there's always another war to follow, one war that ends.
Well,
And so here we are.
you know how that is. Well, in the house with us is Joe Marcinskowski, who was generous enough to get us all connected for all that we're going to be doing over the stint that you're going to be placing here in Harris County, the Houston area. So, Joe, welcome to Politics Done Right as well.
It's wonderful to be here. I'm with the Houston Peace and Justice Center. I'm the chair of the Military Foreign Policy Work Group. One of the things we did was co-found a Foreign Policy Alliance here in Houston, and those two groups, Houston Peace and Justice and Foreign Policy, are promoting this effort today, and we're really excited about having Madea in for this extended weekend. Good to see you. It's been a while since I've seen you. It was the Left Forum in Brooklyn just before the COVID. How you doing, Madea?
Good. It's nice getting out again and seeing friends and talking about such important issues and seeing what people are doing in different areas of the country and how we can build up more opposition to this blank check for endless war.
Well, look, it's great having you here. Now, Madea, I have before we go into, I want to discuss your article because I think that article presented something that is timely and something that we need to get into. But beforehand, I want to talk a little bit about your book. Give us sort of the genesis of it. Why did you write it? Why did you give it the title that you gave it, especially in these times?
My co-author and I had been writing about Ukraine before the war began. We really didn't think that there was going to be an invasion. And when it did happen, we realized that this might be something that could go on for quite a long time and that the American people need to understand the context of this war. And we knew it was going to be a very complicated one for people to wrap their heads around and figure out that there were two wars going on, one in which the Russians were the aggressor and went into another sovereign country, and another geopolitical war in which the U.S. was laying the groundwork for this to happen. And the reason we called it a senseless war is because it could have been stopped so many different times, including right up the month before the war started, when the Russians put out a peace plan and tried to negotiate, but the U.S. and NATO totally dismissed their calls for negotiations. So this is a war foretold many years ago. As we lay out in the book, there's so many times since 1991 and the dissolution of the Soviet Union that academics and diplomats and others kept saying bad move, expansion of NATO. This is not going to be good. Russia's going to be stuck in a bad position. They're calling it a red line. They're going to retaliate, and here we are.
Well, you use two delineations right there. First, an invasion, and second, a provocation. Why don't you expand on that? Because I think if you one listens to just the narrative that we hear in the United States, we have the glory, glory, hallelujah, the folks who want and love democracy, and an evil empire that's coming in to invade. You're saying it's a lot more. There's a lot more that one needs to go into before just making that simplistic assessment. So why don't you expand on those two that you actually just brought up?
Well, that's right, because you hear from the Biden administration and from the mainstream media these two words constantly, unjustified and unprovoked. And we say, hold on a minute. This was certainly provoked, and it certainly is unjustified in that invading Ukraine was not the way to deal with it. But we've been provoking Russia for a long time now, and I mentioned the 1991, which was the dissolution of the Soviet Union. And there are many people who still deny that the U.S. actually made an agreement with Russia that we would not expand NATO eastward. And yet there's so many documents saying that this was indeed the case, that it was very clear that Secretary James Baker talked to Gorbachev, but not only Baker, there were many other officials who did as well, making that same kind of pledge. And yet when you see the kind of expansion that took place over the years and how Russia was basically surrounded by NATO countries, we say that definitely was a tremendous provocation, especially since NATO is not, something we also hear in the mainstream media, a defensive alliance. It's an aggressive military alliance, and this was proven by the fact that NATO has gone all over the world, very far from the North Atlantic, to invade and bomb other countries. So there was great reason why Russia was very upset with NATO for this expansion and felt threatened by it.
Yeah, Joe. Well, let me ask you this, Madea, because most of the people that are listening to what you have to say would look at that as, my God, you're speaking up against democracy. You're speaking up about, by making a statement like that, you're almost justifying that Russia had some real or legitimate reason to go into to Ukraine. I don't think that's what you're saying. I think what you're saying is that geopolitically speaking, and that's what you mentioned when you first started, is that geopolitically speaking, one has to take into account positions of power. One has to take into account borders of power. So please expand on that.
Yes, absolutely. I keep saying it's unjustified, it's brutal, it's inhumane, it's illegal. The invasion is horrific, and the Ukrainian people every day are suffering the consequences. But it's important to understand the context, because then that is the only way we can look towards what are the solutions. And putting it in the context also has to be the fact that the U.S. was so heavily involved in the internal affairs of Ukraine when there was a spontaneous democratic uprising in 2014 that turned violent and resulted in the overthrow of a, yes, corrupt, but yes, elected government, turning a government from one that was pro-Russia to one that was pro-West. The U.S. was heavily involved in that. And we have the proof of it from a leaked phone conversation that the Assistant Secretary of State, Victoria Nuland, was actually plotting who would be the next leader of Ukraine. And then the following years, we have the U.S. and NATO pouring weapons into that country, training the military. So that context is important. Nobody wants interference in the internal affairs of another country. And certainly the U.S. has been doing it all over the world. But Ukraine is one example where right on Russia's border, you have the U.S. so heavily involved that it really decides who is going to be the leader of Ukraine. I don't think you can deny the U.S. interference.
Before we continue, I just wanted to put our telephone number out there: 713-526-5738. Anybody who wants to ask Madea something, or anybody who wants to talk about Ukraine, give us a call: 713-526-5738. Hit the number 2. Hit the number 2 if you want to come on air. But right now, Joe is going to tell. Madea is going to be in town. Madea, you're going to be in town several days, given your talk throughout Houston. So Joe is going to tell us about how they can come
All right.
see you.
Tomorrow, December 3rd at 7 p.m., she'll be at the Houston Mennonite Church on Worth Road. On Sunday, she'll be at First UU Church on Fannin from 2 to 4. Monday, she'll be at the Bay Area UU Church on El Camino Real down in Clear Lake from 7 to 9. And on Tuesday, she'll be at Lone Star College up in Kingwood, be presenting to a live audience there, and it's going to be live streamed by Alberto here to the other 6 campuses, and Pax Christi, Texas will be on the feed too.
Absolutely so. So, Madea, you have a busy schedule when you come here to Houston. I hope you're eating your Wheaties.
Well, it's energizing after writing the book and being able to get out on the road and talk to people about it. That's why we wrote the book. We certainly didn't write it to make any money, because you don't make money from these books. What you do is really educate people. And at a time when people are so confused and having a difficult time wrapping their head around what's the best thing, how can we avoid a nuclear war, how can we avoid a larger war, and how can we stop the brutality that's going on now, it is so important to get out and talk to people and brainstorm together what are the ways that we can affect change, how can we put pressure on elected officials, where do things stand with the Democrat and Republican Party, what's going to happen when this next round of $37 billion is going to be voted on in Congress. So there's a lot of things to talk about.
Now, before I really want to kind of go into the guts of that article that you wrote for Common Dreams. Before that, I want to invite other people to come in if they want to. This is a subject. I mean, it's funny that you just said, I write books to really inform, but I don't really write books to make a lot of money, because especially in political books and this sort of a stuff, Madea, it is difficult as hell. You have to be out there, but I get it. Let's talk about the I think it was the overthrow that occurred in, Joe, what year was the overthrow?
2014.
2014.
February. Yeah.
Right. What was the genesis of that? Because I think one of the tenets that you're saying is that United States involvement, the bulk of the United States involvement culminated with that overthrow. And did you want to add something to that, Joe? Or?
Well, basically, the U.S. was heavily involved in funding the overthrow of the Ukraine government. Yushchenko was a corrupt, but he was elected a president of the country, and he tried to cut a deal with Europe where he would get similar treatment to what the Russians were offering, and the deal wasn't good enough, so he went back and made a deal with the Russians, and that freaked out the Ukrainians and the United States, yes. And we helped overthrow that. There's a telephone conversation between Victoria Nuland speaking to the U.S. ambassador, describing who she wants to put in there, and when the ambassador says, well, hey, the EU doesn't want that, she says, well, tell the EU to go F themselves. And that type of involvement that we do in these countries it's horrendous. It does nothing but destroy any hope for redemption in these situations, and we keep funding it. She had $5 million at hand that she bragged about. It goes on and goes on, and Madea just brought up the $37 billion. What does that bring? $100 billion? And what's that for? We're feeding oligarchs in this country that run military-industrial complexes. Yeah. That's what it's all about.
What's your thoughts on that, Madea?
Well, yeah, so, I like to think of Victoria Nuland as she's outside with the protesters giving out sandwiches and cookies and think, what if on January 6th, when the right-wing Republicans were trying to storm the Congress and overthrow our government, there was a Russian diplomat that went out there to hand out some goodies to people and say, yeah, go get them, overthrow the government. I mean, it's just inconceivable that that would happen here in the U.S., but the U.S. does that and did that. And so, yes, it is so important that people understand the extent, which we really don't know. You know, these U.S. has been involved in coups all over the world, and it takes us many years after the fact to get the information about what was how involved the U.S. We have to do these Freedom of Information Act requests. But finally, when it comes out, we see the intimate use of the funds that Joe just talked about, how it's given to different groups, creating new groups, manipulating peaceful protests, and that's precisely what happened in the case of Ukraine.
Absolutely. So on the internet, Bridge asked just now, or giving us some news. She says, live, Putin refuses to negotiate with U.S. on ending war. Russia's President Vladimir Putin has again refused to negotiate with U.S. on ending the war in Ukraine. Mr. Putin is open to talks on a possible settlement in Ukraine, but the West must accept Moscow's demand. The Kremlin said on Friday. The Kremlin's response comes a day after U.S. President Joe Biden has said he is ready to speak with Mr. Putin if the Russian president is interested in ending the war with Ukraine, as he sought to alleviate European anger over U.S. subsidies. As somebody who wrote, "Is peace possible in Ukraine?" What's your thought on that? That just hit the wire a few minutes ago.
Well, I don't think there is. If Biden wants to talk to Putin, he would have been talking to Putin, and he would talk to Putin. He has said with many conditions, including that he won't, that Ukraine has to be agreeable to it, that NATO has to be agreeable to it, and that Russia has to say we're ready to end this war. I say that they should be talking to each other. They should have been talking to each other a long time ago. That we are calling on our president to talk to Putin, that we are calling on our Secretary of State to talk to his counterpart in Russia, and we want to see it happen. We don't want them to be going back and forth saying, you know, how are we going to stop this war from expanding? Because while that is absolutely critical, the real critical issue is how do we stop the fighting right now? Because we saw that missile that went into Poland and killed 2 people, and there was all kinds of reports, including the AP wire service, that said it came from Russia, and this was potentially the beginning of a Third World War. Luckily, the Polish head of state said no, it did not come from Russia, it came from Ukraine. And so a crisis at that moment was averted. But that's just one potential errant missile, and there will be more, and maybe one will come from Russia. So we have to recognize how dangerous this situation is, how it's a more dangerous situation than the time of the Cuban Missile Crisis.
Exactly.
And that we have to recognize that just talking about talks is not good enough. We want real talks.
713-526-5738. 713-526-5738. If anybody wants to speak to Madea Benjamin on the subject at hand. Joe, why don't you tell us again where people can come visit Madea as she gives her talks throughout Houston, the several days that we're going to be here.
Okay, tomorrow, Houston Mennonite Church, 7 p.m. at 1231 Worth Road. Sunday, on Fannin, the First UU Church, it'll be at 2 to 4. Monday, Clear Lake area, Bay Area UU Church, from 7 p.m. to 9 p.m. And you can go up to Lone Star College or just get on a feed. Alberto's offering the feed, and it'll be available to you to get onto. It's a YouTube feed, isn't it?
It's a YouTube feed. if I can tell them the URL, if you go to politicsdoneright.com/Medea, politicsdoneright.com/Medea, Medea is spelled Medea. So it's politicsdoneright.com/Medea. You will be able to go ahead and watch the live stream it's on Tuesday at 12:30 Central, correct? Did I get that right?
Yes.
Tuesday at 12:30 Central. So, Madea, you're going to be doing, the great thing about having you in town putting this message out there is just like you said, the mainstream media has a narrative, and everybody picks up on that narrative, and it's sort of like a self-fulfilling prophecy that occurs when we have it this way. The same thing that occurred, I don't know if of course you remember, the Iraq War, etc. We constantly create these narratives, and it's then generally hard to get it out of the psyche of people. Your thoughts?
Well, my thoughts are that what the narrative is that this is a winnable war by the Ukrainians, and that if we just send them enough weapons, enough money, that they will be able to take back every inch of territory that Russia has claimed in the Donbass and Crimea, while the people in our own Pentagon, who I must say are used to losing wars because they've been doing that for quite a while, they are saying this is not a winnable war. They can't win on the battlefield, and they should, as the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff has said, seize the moment and go from the battlefield to the negotiating table. So if the people in the Pentagon understand this, that should trickle down or up, or sideways to the people in the White House and to our Secretary of State.
Well, interestingly, the European Union, they have a much more negative assessment as far as whether one can win the war, whether Ukraine can win the war. I mean, just the math alone tells you otherwise, right? I mean, Russia doesn't have to have highly technical equipment to really keep Ukraine in trouble. But anyway, let's go ahead and talk a little bit about your paper, because I found the paper fascinating. You had these 8 reasons why we should go to for peace. The first one is you want to read that first, the first topic, Joe?
The first and most urgent reason is the incredible daily deaths and suffering in Ukraine, and the chance to save millions more Ukrainians from being forced to leave their homes, their belongings, and the conscripted men folk that we may never see again.
Tell us about that.
Well, I think number one in all of this is what's happening to the Ukrainians. And they're being killed, they're being forced to flee their homes, and about 10 million of them, which is a third of the population, are now facing winter without adequate electricity, energy, water, and this is misery, and it must be stopped. And I think those who say that talking to Putin is going against the best interests of the Ukrainians are wrong, because they're the ones suffering from this.
And interestingly, Madea, the other issue is what it has done to the school cycle and all of that. It just simply takes away years from. It's going to be a year from the developmental stages of these kids, and much more, and much more. What's the second one?
Neither side can achieve a decisive military victory, and with its recent military gains, Ukraine is in a good negotiating position.
Your thoughts?
I'm sorry.
That's right. The item 2 is neither side can achieve a decisive military victory, and with its recent military gains, Ukraine is in a good negotiating position, which is what you claim, I think, also in your book.
Well, right. That it's quite remarkable that Ukraine has been able to push back on so many fronts, but Russia still controls 20% of the territory, and they have fortified their areas along the Donbass, and they have tremendous strength in Crimea as well. And let's also let the audience understand, your listeners understand, that Crimea, which is a contested area, has been under Russia control for 200 years, in fact, longer than it's been under Ukrainian control. So there are a lot of people inside Crimea that identify with Russia, that are Russian speakers, and that want to be part of Russia. So it's not rational to say that every inch will be returned to Ukraine and that it can be done on the battlefield.
Next one.
U.S. government officials, especially in the Republican Party, are starting to balk at the prospects of continuing this enormous level of military and economic support. You know, we talked about $100 billion a few minutes ago, but only about 30% of the weapons are actually getting into the hands of the Ukrainians. There's a tremendous black market out there. There's a real good article in Ukrainska Pravda. It's a Ukrainian media group talking about the Monaco battalion. These are oligarchs living in Monaco on the Côte d'Ivoire, where they're living on yachts and big, beautiful homes, and they're getting fantastic amount of money coming in from these black markets that are going through there. So as taxpayers, we got to be upset about this. Go ahead, Madea, why don't you add to that, please?
Well, yes, we've already sent, there was one tranche of money that was $40 billion. There was another that was $13 billion. There's now $37 billion that's being asked for with no end in sight.
Yeah.
And as Joe said, we don't know where so many of these weapons are going when there are some Republicans who have asked for a inspector general to be set up to monitor where these weapons are going and have some auditing. The White House didn't want to do that. We know in the past when we have sent weapons and flooded places like Afghanistan and Iraq with weapons, what we got was Al-Qaeda and ISIS. And we have no idea who is buying weapons on the black market. So there has to be an outcry, and so far that outcry is only coming from a small group of Republicans, but not from any of the Democrats.
Yeah, Madea, when you said we don't know who's buying things, when these HIMARS, the missiles that are so precious to us, were sent over there, one of the first HIMARS was bought on the black market by the Russians for $150,000. So they had our weaponry before the Ukrainians had it.
Yeah, it is amazing. Now, Madea, the fourth item you're talking about, the war is causing upheavals in Europe, which is true. There's one piece of that article that I kind of said, you know, the only thing that I wanted to add to that number 4 part that you did was that we shouldn't give the corporations a pass with just using Ukraine as one of the sole causes of inflation. I saw that in the article and I said, she's right, but God, please don't give those corporations a break. Your thoughts on number 4 that said the war is causing upheavals in Europe, including that of inflation.
Well, yes, the Europeans are really suffering from the sanctions that their own governments have imposed on Russia. And while Russia is still getting a lot of money in from selling its energy to other countries, the Europeans who are relying on the energy from Russia are having to buy it from other sources, including from the United States, at 4 or 5 times the price that the Americans are paying. And so Russians are speaking out and saying the U.S. is profiting from this war. The dirty energy companies in the U.S. are trying to fill the vacuum from the Russian energy. And they're also, the Europeans, complaining that the U.S. is profiting from the increased amount of money that the European countries are now spending on the military, because a lot of that money is just going back to U.S. weapons manufacturers. And then in terms of the Russian population, they're bearing the brunt of this, and we see big demonstrations that are happening in a number of different countries where people are going out on the street, and they're saying that the cost of our of heating our homes is beyond our reach at this point, the cost in the grocery stores, and yet here we are giving all this money to Ukraine and imposing these sanctions that are hurting us. So it's affecting politically the countries in Europe, and affecting the people, of course, in a very negative way.
You know,
Yeah, let me just correct you there. You said the Russian people. I think you were talking about the EU people. People in Europe
Sorry, yeah.
are suffering. And one other thing is that when we passed that inflation bill a while ago, we had lots of money to enhance us bringing in European industries into the United States, and a lot of them, because they don't have cheap energy anymore, are moving their operations over here. Battery companies, car industries, and this is killing Germany. Germany is dead unless they do something, and I
Well,
know they're
right,
very
and that's
upset.
another thing they're complaining so much about is you're taking companies that have been providing jobs for us in Europe and enticing them to come to the United States because of low energy prices.
exactly. All right, folks. You notice we haven't gotten a lot of calls. This is something that's interesting. This is a very important subject on international issue that can cause us as Americans a whole lot of pain, and we have made it so placé, Madea, that what has happened is people just kind of put it on the sideline, which allows our politicians to do as they please and so forth. So, folks, if you have any interest or thoughts in this particular subject, 713-526. In about 5 minutes, we're going to be talking the other issue. Madea will give us a closer, but call 713-526-5738, 713-526-5738 if you have any particular issue or questions on Ukraine. Madea, we have about 3 more minutes. Altogether, what would you like? How would you like to frame what Americans need to know to make this a better a better situation, if you will?
They need to know that the message that is coming from Congress and from certain parts of the White House are putting us in the situation of funding another unwinnable war that is not in the interests of the American people, and that our representatives are not representing us. And so we need to organize more, whether we call ourselves left, right, Republican, Democrat, independent, libertarian, whatever, and get our voices heard by those who control the purse strings and have the power in this country, so that they really reflect not only our needs, but what's in the best interest of the entire region, of Ukraine, of Europe, and to the world, because as long as we keep spending hundreds of billions of dollars on weapons and war and close to $1 trillion on the Pentagon, we will not have enough money to address either the needs at home, like health care and a good education system that doesn't put our young people in debt, or dealing with the climate crisis that really is the existential threat for humanity.
Well, listen, Madea, I just gave a call out and said people are not calling, and then the phone lines just lit up. So let me go ahead and take this call from Madeline. And Madeline, you're on the air.
Hi, Egberto, and hi, Madea. Madeline Crozet Williams. This has been a real concern of mine. I have talked to what I thought were some very progressive friends about this issue. And one of the responses I keep getting would be, well, it would just be immoral for us to not go in and aid the Ukrainians militarily. And my response has been, well, I've done a lot of reading on this, and I agree with Colonel Wilkerson, who said several months ago, we're looking at possibly choosing between saving Ukraine or starting a nuclear war, which would possibly blow up a large part of the whole world. And I think that's a real moral consideration, too. And I keep curious to see what your thoughts on this are, Madea.
Well, I don't like to pose it as those are the two options, because I don't think this is saving Ukraine. I think with every day that goes by, we see Ukraine being destroyed. And if we think that destroying homes, residential neighborhoods, electricity grids, water supplies, sewer systems, is, quote, saving Ukraine, it's not. And I think there are certainly some people in Ukraine who want to fight to the last Ukrainian, but there is a rising number of people inside Ukraine who are the ones who are most affected by this war, who are also really now at this point saying we've got to find a way to end this war. We've got to go to the negotiating table. So this is really about saving Ukraine, stopping us from getting into a broader war, and the possibility of not just a nuclear war, but an explosion in that Zaporizhia nuclear plant or other nuclear plants, in, which could be so disastrous for the entire
world
region of Europe, if not the world.
Yeah. Anything
I
else
think
you want to
this
ask Madeline before we go to Irina?
Yeah, I just think I used to teach visual merchandising at the university several years ago, and I'm not necessarily visual, but just from the merchandising standpoint, the press, the corporate press, has done an amazing job of creating this viewpoint in the American people, and that's all they've looked at. So
Right.
that's all I
Right.
have to say.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Madeline. We have to run to Irina now, so let's get Irina on the air. Irina, you're on.
Yes, hello. My name is Irina, and I'm originally from Ukraine. I've been living in United States for about over 20 years. Not only I'm from Ukraine, I'm from Crimea, actually, from Kerch, where the bridge is between Russia and Ukraine. And I have family in Kharkiv that was bombed by Russians mercilessly and destroyed most of the town. I have family that is not living in Kharkiv anymore because they had to move. Their areas were destroyed. They had to move out. The only thing that helps us to survive, and my people to survive, is our spirits, our forces, and American and European help and weapons. If you stop this help now, we have much more death than we have now. So if somebody says, and I heard that let's Russian take Ukraine, let's Russian take Crimea back because Russia had it for a long time. Yeah, let's have America's colonies back to England or South Texas to Mexico. Let's revise all the border. All these people who are stronger to get smaller countries because of their ambition. I also heard that HIMARS was sold in the black market for $140,000 or something to Russia. I didn't see any evidence of that. I would like to see the sources.
Irina, I get you.
Yes,
I get
yes.
the point, and I really understand that what you're saying, and what you did with the United States as to say, suppose it's amazing that you chose England as suppose England came and wanted back the colonies. My answer would be suppose the indigenous folks came back and wanted their land. I mean, the frame of reference was a bit astounding, but let's get Madea into answering that question.
The point is that to revise the borders
yes,
is a wrong idea.
I get
we
it, Irina.
cannot revise the borders and get, let's strong person, let's strong country get the piece of the territory they want.
Right. Irina,
This is
you're
not
making
right.
a lot of sense. I understand what you're saying, and that's the reason I want to hear Madea's response, but because it's important. And that's a good analogy that you gave as well. Go ahead, please, Madea.
Yes, I'm sorry for the suffering that your family is undergoing, and that's precisely why we feel that these things have to be hashed out at the negotiating table, that the people of Crimea need to have an internationally supervised referendum in which they can decide what their future will be, the same with Donbass. But that's the kind of thing that's going to come from talks. It's not going to come from the battlefield. You know as well as I do that Russia is well equipped, that is entrenched in the Donbass area, as well as in Crimea, and there are in both places, maybe not your family, but others who do side with Russia. So this has to be worked out peacefully.
Why would be people of Donbass? They're not people of Donbass. It is internationally recognized borders of independent sovereign country. Why somebody would come and take it because they're stronger? Why somebody would come to and get Crimea?
Irina.
They didn't have any right. It is breaking of international law. Let's go and have
Well,
Irina,
and-
I get it. You're right. Okay, I understand.
Let's remember that Crimea was part of Russia for 200 years.
Crimea
It
was the
handed
part
over
of
by
Greece.
Khrushchev,
Crimea was the part of the
who
Ottoman
did not have
Empire.
the
One
right-
person at a time,
who
please,
did not
Irina.
have the right to hand that over. That since Russia came in 2014, people have been living peacefully in Crimea. And so if
I
there
know
were
how they
an
would be. My
international...
brother had to escape from
Irina,
Crimea.
Irina,
when they
I have
came.
to go to some other callers, but I want to ask a favor, Irina, because Joe wants to talk to you, has been from Crimea. So I want to ask you to drop me a line at info@politicsdoneright.com. info@politicsdoneright.com with your information so I can pass it along to our researcher here, Joe Marcinskowski. So please do that, but we're really interested in having somebody that's been on that land to speak about. That's the kind of work that we do. So Irina, we have to thank you for calling, and please get in touch with us, info@politicsdoneright.com. We'll continue the conversation, okay?
Okay, bye-bye.
Thank you very much. All right, let's go ahead and get Bridge on the line. Bridge on the line. How you doing, Bridge?
Hey, Egberto, how you doing?
Great, my dear. Talk to me.
I had a question for Madea or you guys. The one thing I don't hear and I don't understand is why isn't Ukraine part of NATO, and wouldn't that solve a lot of problems?
Madea?
No, that's part of the problem is that Russia was always saying that Ukraine has this extensive border with Russia, that inviting Ukraine into NATO was a red line for Russia. They didn't want an aggressive military alliance to have extended, which it already has along its border in places like Poland and Romania and the Baltic countries. And they have always said the real red line would be Ukraine. And the U.S. knew that. The Europeans knew that in 2008 when there was a meeting of NATO and George Bush pushed for NATO to include Ukraine. The Europeans pushed back and said, no, that's a very bad idea. But unfortunately, now NATO is asking for, Ukraine is asking for membership in NATO, but any kind of real peace talks will have to result in Ukraine being a neutral country because Russia just won't accept it. And I think for Americans, it's important to recognize that we've had 200 years of something called the Monroe Doctrine, where the U.S. would not allow other countries to have an influence in our, quote, backyard, and went in and overthrew governments throughout Latin America that weren't pro-U.S. enough. Russia does have its own security interests, and having Ukraine in NATO is indeed, or has already been indeed, a red line.
Wow, Madea, I first of all, I want to compliment you on making that necessary comparison for Americans themselves to understand. We've had the Monroe Doctrine how many? 100 and something years now.
200 next year will be 200.
Next year will be 200 years. Where we here's a victim of that issue, Panama and the building of the Panama Canal, etc., etc., etc. So, great observation, Bridget. I want to say something else.
I understand, but I don't like it.
Yeah.
I think that they should be part of the NATO, but I do understand the reasoning. It just, I don't know.
It's
I think that would make a
difficult.
difference
Well,
if they
I'd love
were.
for you
Yeah.
to get a copy of the book because we have a whole chapter on NATO itself, and people really need to have a better understanding of NATO because it's always portrayed to us as this defensive alliance, but it's not. It's gone and made wars in Afghanistan and Libya. It's setting its sights now on China. It wants all countries in NATO to spend more money on the military. So it really is a very dangerous alliance. I wish that it had been dissolved at the time that the Warsaw Pact, its counterpart in the Soviet Union, was dissolved. And I certainly don't want it to see it growing as it's doing now.
You know, one of the
Wow.
things, Madea, is that it's difficult in general for Americans to understand these geopolitical issues because we have a media that's solely that it's generally the engine of I don't want to just use propaganda because that is too hard, I think, but generally promotes the messages of our military industrial complex who benefits from the exactly what you're speaking about, the expansion of NATO, asking all NATO countries to spend more money on their defense. Defense from what? I don't know. So you want to expand on that a bit.
Yeah, we're talking about this today when Northrop Grumman has just released unveiled a new stealth bomber capable of carrying nuclear bombs at the cost of $750 million per stealth bomber.
Wow.
And, you got to just think, what are we doing? How insane is this? Does the world really need a new version of a stealth bomber when people are going hungry, when we have so many unhoused people on our streets, when we can't get a decent healthcare system in this country? I mean, we have so
Exactly.
many unmet needs. It's just insanity.
Let me, before I finish, I just want to salute all our folks inside of the chat room that's been having some great conversation. Unfortunately, with the amount of stuff we're doing here, I wasn't able to address all, but I want to welcome Gene Daigle, Bridge, MCP, E2247, Eric Hayes, let's see, Kathy Courtney is in the house as well. With us, we also have Gene Daigle and quite a bit, but Carl Cox is in the house. Thank you guys for listening online. Thank you guys for listening on air. Remember, this is a family, and this is how we do things together. Bridge, anything else you'd like to add before I go to Tori?
Yes, and Medina mentioned the book. Which book?
Okay, the name of the book is Peace Possible in Ukraine? And by the way, Bridge, I'll have it with the links at my website so that we can go. But
Oh,
you
okay.
want to say?
Yes, Bridget, come on down to the Houston Mennonite Church tomorrow night at 7
She's
o'clock.
in New York.
Oh, you're in New York. Oh, I'm
It
sorry
took me a little
about
time to
that.
get there.
But I tell you what, we'll have all the links to her stuff on the website. You know where you're going to find that. Bridget.
Yeah, I'll
People-
find it later.
Yeah, but it'll be the blog correspondent to this program. All right, let's go ahead and get over to Tori. Come on in, Tori.
Hey, great to hear you. And love Madea, Benjamin, and CODEPINK forever. But I think one thing that people haven't been understanding is what Putin's real motivation is. And just to frame this, there's five goalposts on this field. There's 5 players, and they all have different motivations. In any crime scene, they say, follow the money, and that's the motivation. Eastern Europeans want security from invasion and cybersecurity. The U.S., number 2, wants to diminish the Russian military potential, the attrition. So they like to do the long, slow bleed out. I mean, that's the pattern in Iraq and here and there. Just a 10-year bleed out before, just to weaken the regime. Plus, the U.S. wants to diminish Putin's grip on the Russian state. Number 3 is Ukraine. What do they want? They want to maintain their land base. Number 4, Putin. What does he want? Well, first, it's to understand that. It's to understand what the Russians themselves want. There's a nascent movement in Russia for democracy, and historically, what we need to understand what motivated Putin. Just before this invasion of Ukraine, there was trouble in Kazakhstan and in Belarus. Democracy movements that had to be put down, and they weren't able to put them down by those dictators in those 2 countries. Putin had to send in forces to help his friendly dictators in Kazakhstan and Belarus to put down the democracy movement. That's the real motivation. Putin, the thing that Putin fears the most isn't NATO, it's democracy. Because if democracy happens in Russia, Putin will be arrested.
Let's make Madea
for the rest of his
answer
life.
that. Madea, can you address that?
Well, I don't really agree with that. I think Putin before this war was a very, very popular leader. He had about a 76% approval rating. We have to understand that when he came in at a time when the standard of living of the people of Russia had plummeted because of the plundering of their economy by oligarchs, and he improved the economy tremendously, and to the extent that he was one of the most popular leaders. He now, his popularity rating has gone down with this war, and it's hard to judge right now because there is a lot of censorship in Russia, particularly since the war started. But still, it looks like there are over 60% of the Russian people who support their leader. I think there are many different motivations. I mean, we talked about Crimea and it being the only warm-water port that the Russian fleet has access to in the Black Sea, and how important that is for them militarily. There are also the important resources that exist in the Donbass, but that there is a civil war that has been going on since 2014, in which there are people of Russian background, Russian ethnicity, who have been calling on Russia to come in and help them. So I think we have to put together a number of different reasons, but I don't think painting it in terms of just black and white of democracy and dictatorship gives us...
Well, what I was addressing was Putin's fear. You know, what I was talking about was what is Putin afraid of? And, you know, if he wasn't afraid of democracy, he wouldn't be outlawing all the free press. He wouldn't be putting any kind of opposition leaders in prison, and you know, and taking, you know, the oligarchs that oppose him. He goes into their law offices and just takes their ownership papers of their corporations, you know, at gunpoint. You know, I'm talking about Putin's fears. What is he afraid of? And he's afraid of democracy. I mean, you know,
yes, I just am not saying that that's the
Okay,
reason
one at a time. Go ahead, Madea.
Democracy is the most existential threat to Putin, because if there's a real democracy in Russia, he will go to the prison for the rest of his life.
Okay, let her answer, Tori. Go ahead, Madea.
No, I agree with you there. I'm just saying it's not a motivation for invading Ukraine.
I have to agree with that. There's never a correct reason to invade another country if your citizens are not under attack. So I am...
Okay, I'm done.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Tori.
Good to hear you, Madea. Keep coming to Houston.
All right. Thank you, buddy. Appreciate it, Terry. All right. Let's see. And Roberto Lewis, welcome to Politics Done Right as well as we have Jules. Ray, thank you so kindly for being here. Madea, give us a closer, because we're only going to have 7 minutes, because you got very popular at the end of the show. So let's go ahead and get a closer, and then we'll get to the end of the program. Thank you.
A closer from me now.
From you, yes, my dear.
Oh, yes. The name of the book, I just wanted to clarify, is War in Ukraine, Making Sense of a Senseless War. And I'm really looking forward to being in the Houston area to have the kind of discussions that we've just had now, which are very rich and important, and to get beyond the mainstream narrative. The kind of discussion we've had here is something that you won't hear on CNN, MSNBC, or Fox News. So thank you much for this radio station. And please come out and let's keep the discussion going and figure out ways that we can be a positive force in trying to end this war.
Madea, it's been my pleasure to have you on air with us at Politics Done Right. Now, let me ask Joe to give you a bye-bye. Go ahead, Joe.
All right, Madea, we're looking forward to seeing you. I do need the times that you're going to be flying in to be sure to pick you up. I haven't heard that yet. It's scaring me. But Saturday, you're going to be at the Houston Mennonite Church from 7 till 9. Sunday, you're going to be at the First UU Church in 5200 Fadden Street from 2 to 4. Monday, you'll be at the Bay Area UU Church from 7 to 9 p.m. And Tuesday, well, you'll be at Kingwood College from 12:30 to 2:30. speaking on a live stream that Liberto's set up on YouTube, and I guess if it's on YouTube, we'll be able to see that for indefinitely.
Around the world, and
Yeah.
we'll keep it indefinitely. We'll clean it up, of course, and make sure it's all there. Madea, it's been our pleasure to have you here at KPFT 90.1 FM Houston. You have a wonderful day, and we can't wait to see you in person.
Right.
Okay, thanks so much for having me on. Look forward to being there.
Absolutely. All right, let's go to line 2 for Ray before I jump into the subject of the railways. Go ahead, Ray. Talk to me.
Oh, hey, Egberto, I was just trying to get a word in. That Ukraine stuff is pretty heavy.
Yes.
And I'll be the first to admit I don't know, but what I do know is that the biggest losers in this whole ordeal is the people of every nation that are involved.
Right.
Absolutely.
Right.
Yes, sir.
The Russian people and
Yes.
the Ukrainians.
And the
all-
Americans.
Hey, Americans.
And
Yes.
the Americans. And
Yeah, I put the Americans in that too. We
Yes.
are all the biggest losers because all we can really do is sit by and watch our tax dollars go into this war needlessly.
Well, you know, Ray, I just want to say, first of all, thank you for realizing that. But the second thing here is as long as we have folks like Madea, we have folks like Brother Joe Marcinskowski here, and what we do here at KPFT, we get a chance to make people aware because it's interesting that I sent out a tweet a couple days ago that said, because Ukraine just got another several $1 million, and I said it's amazing that it'll only take $1 billion to fix the entire water system of Jackson, Mississippi. It'll take less than $1 billion to fix the water system of Flint, Michigan. But we gave $37 billion to Ukraine and never asked any questions. As Joe would tell you, probably 70% of that went wastefully to the oligarchs who made money on that on the black market. So you are so right in bringing that up, my brother. Anything else before I have to go quickly into the next subject. I only have 3 minutes to discuss the next subject.
No, I ain't gonna hold you, Alberto. Just that's basically the point is that we as the American people have to hold our elected leaders.
Well, look, brother, thank you very much for calling, and you have a wonderful rest of your day. Okay, folks, we are almost out of time here. We have about 3 minutes or so. Let me just say that the second part of the subject today is what occurred in Congress. And, you know, I had one of our devout listeners, you know, he sent me a text this morning and he said, we sold them out. We sold them out. We sold them out. Another supporter sent me an email, said, I agree with what Biden has done. Where do I stand? And here I have two people that are politics done right guys saying, hey, one person agrees with what the Biden and Congress has done. And the other side says that they don't. Let me tell you where I'm at. We did the wrong thing. This was it is true that it is true that these folks. It is true that we were going. If there's a strike, the economy will suffer dearly. That is true. That means that those 115 or 118,000 workers, they have bargaining power. They are worth a lot more than they deserve their week of sick pay. Why did we just acquiesce to the corporatocracy and just said, the corporatocracy just said, we stop negotiating. Biden is going to come to a rescue. The Congress is going to come to a rescue. And you know what really got to me? When my guy said Egberto, and most of the progressives in Congress also supported it. No, if we had said no, they would not have wanted the economy to crater because they love the economy, the money they pull from the economy more than we do. We have to get with the program and we have to start electing people that are going to do the things necessary for us to survive. We're coming close to the end of the program again. I want to thank Joe Marcinskowski for being here with me. It was a pleasure. Thank you so kindly.
Well, thank you very much. It was a pleasure being with you.
And I'd like to thank Madea Benjamin for being here with us as well. And, of course, our PDR posse online. You guys were humping in that room. I hope I won't miss you at 3 o'clock. I want to see this action at 3 o'clock as well, folks. My name is Egberto Willies. This is Politics Done Right. And you guys know how I end this baby. I am what? Out!